So we have the bodhisattva vows, many of us, and we take them every day, but of course we don't have bodhicitta. And so when we have spontaneous bodhicitta, that's the moment that we enter the path. So even though we have both of these precepts and are trying to practice with both aspiring and engaging, or venturing, and what's the first one? Wishing and venturing bodhicitta. When that moment of the spontaneous generation of genuine bodhicitta arises, are we in the wishing mind, or is this the venturing mind that has that realization, that moment?
I suppose one would start out with wishing bodhicitta, because, that's my own opinion. I don't recall any scriptural references specifically on that. In terms of whether one can take bodhisattva vow or not before ever even generating genuine bodhicitta is a topic of discussion where I think the rationale for that is that's itself a way of training. So why, if you're aspiring, why not seize that opportunity? But at the same time, without having a genuine bodhicitta, it wouldn't be, an ideal case of having received bodhisattva vow. But having gone through the ceremony and with our own wish, our willing choice of doing so should make us as much obligated and as much inclined to observe the vows. So that's the case of why not wait until. But in terms of what happens at the time of actually giving rise to genuine bodhicitta, I think one starts out with wishing bodhicitta, and that afterwards, because this should not be any different from anyone starting out afresh as a bodhisattva. So in that respect, the venturing bodhicitta that we're calling it should come later and must come even not soon after one has genuinely developed bodhicitta, but rather kind of even take the time in kind of building that strength, that confidence, and eventually take that. I think so, because that's what makes sense, because in the scriptures it lays out that way, and that doesn't make any exception to taking vows the way we do. I think so. I would really welcome others' comment if they have any exposure to teachings like that. Yes, please.
The elephant in my mind, Geshe,
yes,
is the phrase about anger destroying merit. And in Geshe Sopa's commentary, he talks about different interpretations of this phrase. And I'm just wondering, when actually is anger overcome? And as long as we have the seeds of anger, then we probably can't cultivate bodhicitta and get onto the path. Right?
What was that?
As long as we have the seeds of anger in our mind, then we won't attain the path of the accumulation, because anger prevents bodhicitta. Is that correct?
I don't think anger prevents bodhicitta. What it does is, we can imagine someone who has become bodhisattva, even in a very genuine sense, succumbing to occasional outbursts of anger. So I don't think anger itself prevents bodhicitta. That would be very difficult to say, because that would mean anyone becoming bodhisattva to have overcome it, at least kind of render it unmanifest at all. And one way to keep anger from destroying the merits would be to dedicate them to the highest goal of enlightenment. And that way it could escape the damage from anger. And likewise with other destructive elements. So yes, I mean, generating anger, nor should it prevent bodhicitta, nor should it undo bodhicitta. Because, oh yes, now I remember very clearly. Yes. In terms of losing bodhicitta, one could do that either by giving up on sentient beings out of strong anger, but that doesn't happen instantly. Yes, now I remember. That doesn't happen instantly. It waits for a particular time. Now that time is very difficult to determine. I know a source where to look for. I haven't looked at it. I don't want to say exactly what it is. I don't want to say it is overnight. But it does refer to a certain time range. Within that period, if you don't apply antidote, or if you don't generate genuine regret over that, then you lose it out of giving up on sentient being because of anger. Another way of losing that would be by becoming so discouraged in the face of someone acting so unruly. That's another way of losing bodhicitta, but that too is dependent on passing that time period before one applies the antidote or generates great sincere regret. So that's very clear. For that I have a very strong, clear spiritual reference. So that clearly answers your question of how generating bodhicitta doesn't necessarily have to prevent bodhicitta, nor does it have to necessarily instantly undo bodhicitta. Yes. So this has to do with Semjen Le Tangba of the 5 guidelines of wishing bodhicitta, giving up on sentient beings. That could happen in those 2 ways. And there could be a third one out of wrong view also. But this one is out of rage, out of anger. Where do you give in to a thought like, this is it, I'm not going to worry about you, something like that. And then not rectifying it. Yes, please.
So I have a pretty easy question. Why is the example of Yudanten a counter example?
Why?
Yeah, because they got the little black square. They got the little square bullet, so that means it's a counter example of giving protection, right?
I see. Well, I see. So that twist has not been commented on. Rather, it is presented in that negative sense of how in the case of so this is not a case of giving protection, but rather losing out on someone taking wrong advantage of you. So it, in a sense, it is not a direct presentation of the opposite scenario. But one thing that I wanted to comment on that is that when I said this lion happened to be Shakyamuni Buddha, etc. This is not Shakyamuni Buddha after he became Buddha, but rather in his time of training. And such, this makes sense here. How come we are together here? Right? If it has a cause, then it has a cause that we might have accumulated together. So sometime around in the past, we were again together, like that. So that's how it makes sense. For us to come together just can't happen haphazardly. Yeah. I have difficulty saying the word, so I'm trying it out. But rather out of causes and conditions. And likewise, there is this teaching called Kadamba, father-son instruction, where Geshe, Pande Atisha, Dipamkar Atisha, along with Domtumpa and I think Ngor Losao, London Sherab, they three got together and began to ask questions about where else they had been together in the past. And it's such a very heartwarming story of how guys stick together across lives. And that's not by mere accident, because they happen to accumulate merits together, karmas together. And that's bound to happen. Not that you just stick together always, but every once in a while the karma will ripen to then get together.
Yesterday at some point we talked about how when a bodhisattva cultivates bodhicitta, the world will shake. And I post that discussion, we were talking about how the environmental karma would change. Did I mishear that?
Pardon?
That we talked about how the environmental karma of the world at large.
Oh yeah. It should.
Awakened
yes, there's a shift in who is participating in it, and once that is gone, it would shift. That's how I would rationalize it. Yeah, and that's what it is marking, at least with those tremors, with those signs, like yes, someone is parting off. No more part of this karmic. Karmic cauldron.
I don't expect a super in-depth answer, but maybe a very shallow answer about how the environmental karma would change for the other people that are still in the cauldron.
Now they will be left with their common karma, not the contribution from the bodhisattva. That's what I meant. Pardon?
So it's worse.
Well, not necessarily worse. Not necessarily worse. It doesn't necessarily have to be that the contribution that was coming from the would-be bodhisattva or just become bodhisattva was necessarily good at that time. It could be some part of him kind of having ripened that he was going through. Very awful things could be a catalyst. So that marvelous happening could have been catalyzed by something apparently not so good even. So anyway, I think because of that part gone, now we're dealing with a different, different collection, and thus it would have different impact, I think. That's interesting. The thing about that, and when I came across that, it was quite. We do come across in the scriptures of how that happened across several world systems, etc., which marks someone generating bodhicitta and have now joined the ranks of bodhisattvas and would-be Buddhas. It's a big deal. And thinking of the impact that it would have on top of the scope of such a thought, such a vision, etc., and the impact it would have is huge compared with anything that we can think of in the world. Anything that we have, that we call them as marvelous, wonderful, something, really pales in comparison with what could come from that. So I think either it could be understood in a metaphorical way or in a literal sense, but nonetheless, that is a big thing. So then, their parting way from the samsaric constraint really seems to make sense. That now there is a shift in the common karmic collection, to which, because of which we are subject to samsaric condition. Yeah, just imagine 100,000 or 10, 20 of us here, right? And the presence of one would make a difference. And once that is gone, the dynamic is changed. Doesn't necessarily have to be for good or bad, but the dynamic is changed. And that would mean dynamic in terms of relations, in terms of how things get done, what gets done, what gets precedence, what gets priority, all of that. Yeah, so ship definitely should come.
More of a comment. I'll leave the hard-hitting questions for the venerable monastics. You said earlier that oftentimes, more often than not, it's our overactive, worrisome imagination that is so far worse than the reality. I was reminded of the great American essayist and humorist Mark Twain, who said, "My life has been a series of ongoing disasters, most of which never happened."
That's very true. I mean, we are such a what would be the expression?
Screenwriters.
Pardon?
Better person that we're very good screenwriters.
Yes.
Entire dramas. And
Yes, exactly. Sometimes I use this scenario of someone being very expert, right? Very expert in drawing, and then he draws from his imagination a ghost, and given his expertise, he really pulls off a really scary ghost. After he has created it, he himself is scared by it every time he sees it. Yeah, that's exactly how we do. We create, we create all these scenarios. I mean, even given our own afflictions, all of those, from a Buddhist perspective, and to a certain extent, I mean, that's something that bears truth to the fact that yes, they are grounded in misperceptions. It's like one's really scared of what one sees as snake, but there is no snake at all. But the anger, the fear is real. In that whole of your body is stirred up, the blood pressure goes. I mean, your face reddens and whatnot. You're trembling, and by thinking that there is a snake, but there is not. I mean, they can be. And so goes the same with the very basis of afflictions in the form of this projection into inherent existence, which is, we speak a lot about negating the object of self-grasping, whereas that object has never existed at all. It's because it has never existed at all, then we can negate it. Otherwise, it cannot be. And it's on that basis that all of these afflictions happen. Even thinking as plain as that is a case of creation, our own creation, that really makes things worse. And then on top of that, we use that as a brick and then really come up with our own imagination of what might happen. Oh, what ifs is worse? What if? Oh, yeah. And as I said, in so many of the cases, those ifs are, even if that were to happen, there is nothing we would be able to do but we nonetheless care to bring them up and then place ourselves in front of them and get really stirred by that. Yeah, so that is a very apt saying, very apt expression. Yes, please.
I had two questions that came up from our classes that we've been holding for the last while. And one was about the Sambhogakaya, complete enjoyment body. And is that, it's an impermanent phenomena, is it form or is it consciousness or what is it? Or is it all bets are off? Or is it a person?
Yes, it is a person.
It's a person. Because the way it was described in Jeffrey Hopkins' book, Meditation and Emptiness, makes it sound, it says, through the force of compassion and wishes over countless eons, the ultimate wisdom itself appears in the aspect of a body. And so we were having this discussion, is it a body, is it a consciousness?
Oh, I see. I see.
Venerable Seppo said,
that's a way of calling. That's a way of, actually what is happening, at least if I were to give my shot here, is that right now we are functioning, operating on a very gross level of consciousness conjoined with the body. The subtler it becomes, we become dysfunctional. We are just not trained in staying operational, functional at that level. And that's how when the subtlest consciousness arises or manifests, we are dead. We are dead. So it just appears because that's all that is left of us. It manifests. And whereas the possibility is for us to be fully functional at that level with the body. That was one way of calling the subtlest consciousness becoming a body. That was one way of calling it, because the subtlest consciousness is accompanied by the subtlest energy. In terms of becoming a body, that energy becomes both the energy and the consciousness can be called to become the body or contribute to the body, but in different ways. The subtlest energy as its substantial cause, and the consciousness accompanying it in the form of clear light as its cooperative condition. And likewise, in regard to the mind or the omniscience of the Buddha at that level, the subtlest consciousness serves as its substantial cause, and the subtle energy as its cooperative cause. But in a way, they are so integrated and conjoined together that it's almost like speaking of the same thing. Almost like speaking of the same thing. But what it is it's being fully functional at that level. So like we are supposed to visualize in our generation practice or in our deity yoga, we kind of imagine coming down to that level of consciousness, and then out of that we arise into that form. So that was imagination, that was visualization, but that's the Sambhogakaya level is like the culmination of it in reality. So in that sense, it is the body, but body not in the gross sense. That's how I think, and that's how scriptures, exactly what you read also translates to.
Those are taken from his Tibetan teachers.
Yeah. I mean, what I meant is not just Jeffries, but even in the scriptures also. That's what it is explained. Yeah, that's what it is. It's not merely the clear light mind having manifest, but not just manifest, but having now become fully employed into functionality, in full-blown functionality, without having to, wait for any grosser consciousness to ever rely on to function. Yeah. So, yes. In a way, one thing in Buddhist context, in the sutras, we very often find the mention of consciousness in such a way as though consciousness by itself can stand. Whereas from a, what do you call, the ultimate Buddha's intent point of view, which is from the point of view of the highest Yoga Tantra, there can never be a consciousness alone thing. It has always to be a combination at whatever level we speak of. And that is very unique in Buddhism, in that because of that, we still maintain individuality, even at the highest, ultimate Buddhahood level. It's not that when we become Buddhas, we march into each other. In a way, there is a marja in that. There is full transparency in terms of who knows what and what goes what. But in terms of who is who, there's the difference. In terms of the causal continuum. So that's where that's one area that Buddhism differs with other Eastern religions, where they speak of cosmic consciousness, like we are just what do you call, water in separate cups, but once the cup breaks, it all merges together. That's not the case, because in our case, even at that level of death, at the subtlest consciousness level, there still is nonetheless a physical substratum to which it is tied. And that's what determines its locality. Very often people in the paranormal research, as they call it, paranormal, researching into life after life, etc. People would, when they see signs like Pemlomel, right? Yeah. They say, oh yeah, after one has died, there is no locality. As though to suggest that if you are everywhere. That's in a way one could speak in such terms, but not in the sense of being totally non-local. Because what they're speaking of non-local is that now you are no more dependent on a brain, and that's how they speak of non-locality. But from a strictly Buddhist perspective, at least from the way I understand, it's still not non-local. Yet at the same time, at the Buddha's level, we have a way of speaking of Buddhas being present everywhere. And there is a case to make because of the fact that they are functional, fully functional at that subtlest, clear level, nature. In that the mere reflection of an object is enough for them to be where the object is. But that nonetheless do not reduce them completely one homogeneous thing.
Second question was, I had listened to a teaching by Jim Blumenthal, who was a student at Geshe Sopa's, a Westerner, passed away. And he was saying that when you get to the 8th ground and beyond, that our understanding of emptiness doesn't deepen. The understanding of emptiness doesn't deepen. And he was talking about that we get rid of the obscurations to omniscience. And I was wondering what that meant. And we asked Jeffrey Hopkins this, and he talked about, he thought that actually at those levels that our understanding of emptiness broadened, according to Lama Tsongkhapa. And he took that to mean that because at that point, they learned so many reasonings. But I was wondering if that's what it referred to, like this. Yeah, from
the first ground on, you don't understand emptiness any better. Is that correct?
Yeah, I mean, in one sense, I mean, yeah, not any more correct. Yeah, not any more correct and not any more direct, right? It's a matter of how, yeah, how powerful it becomes, how it becomes supported by more strength of virtue, merit, but at the same time, with each progression, what is that? The scope of cessation increases. Yeah, the scope of cessation increases. To that extent, we can speak of some, in a way, speak of emptiness, or the emptiness nature of it kind of expanding. Yeah, in a way, with the cessation increasing, because the cessation being the emptiness, whatnot. So the emptiness of the refined consciousness, like that. So they will be chunyili keparmetya. And there's even an expression in the scripture where it says chunyili keparmetya. There's no difference in how you see the emptiness, but there is the difference in how what do you call, expansive the chuku cessation becomes.
To the power?
I mean, power definitely, because it has to gather power from the merits so that it could tackle, counteract the more subtler stains.
So is there any kind of shift? What's the shift then at the 8th level?
Now, at the 8th level, the shift is, even in the post-meditative states, you do not generate any manifest self-grasping. Yeah, self-grasping. No. Not just self-grasping. Oh, yes. No manifest self-grasping. You may still see things inherently existent, but do not grasp it. Nor do you give rise to any kind of a full-blown manifest self-grasping from that point on. Yes. Yeah. You brought it out very rightly. Yes, the afflictions are gone. That's why now the full-grown manifest self-grasping being and affliction would not be there. But because of the subtle stains of it, things would nonetheless still appear, at least during the post-meditative state, still appear to be inherently existent.
Just to follow up, it seems to be different for fundamental vehicle arhats, though, that they for fundamental vehicle arhats, once they achieve arhatship, it seems from some presentations that they still have some afflictions in their mind, but they can't become manifest.
I see.
Can you
Not affliction. If you are using this term for klesha, no afflictions. We call that nengelengitima. It's like very subtle traits from strong habituation. Yeah, and subtle traits that kind of almost comes about without any control, kind of naturally, like almost sometimes behaving beneath their dignity, kind of naturally. What do you call? Naturally. Yeah, slip of the tongue. Yeah, slip of the tongue in terms of curses and whatnot, but not meaning it. So in those respects, but those could be called afflictions, but not if you are using that for klesha. They wouldn't be klesha.
One more, couple more.
Yes, please.
Quick ones, I think.
Yes.
We've been studying sense faculties and
Sense. Oh.
Yeah, and so
Which university?
The Sravasti University.
Oh, okay.
Sravasti Monastery. Yeah, with our Sautrantika hats on. So which clairvoyance sees an eye sense faculty? You know, it says that the eye sense faculty or the ear sense faculty is very subtle, clear matter. And we're curious, well, which kind of clairvoyance knows that?
I see. I think that might be. I don't know exactly, but that might be Miki Gunshe. What is that?
Divine eye?
Visual. How would you call that? Clairvoyance, right? Yeah.
Which is different than clairaudience.
Oh, clairaudience. Yeah. So it would be.
Clairvoyance is not. People often use it as a term to mean any kind of supernatural power.
Okay.
Yes.
So what type of super knowledge?
There's one that is called, like he said, which
Miki Gunshe.
Yeah.
It says I clairvoyance. Oh, it is called I just for the sake that it is a power of seeing visual things, but it is not itself dependent. It is not itself a sense consciousness, nor is it dependent on sense organ. But the sense organ should definitely be. I don't know how one would look to one's own sense organ, but I mean things as subtle as that could definitely be cognized by that.
That's a term that you would actually correctly translate as clairvoyance.
I see.
That would be the correct translation of that term.
Clairvoyance.
But many people use clairvoyance to subsume all 5 or all 6 of those,
extrasensory.
which is a wrong translation.
Okay. And then along these same lines, what super knowledge, or is that the correct term? What super knowledge perceives past lives?
Oh, there is a special there is a specific super knowledge by that name, which means seeing past lives. Seeing past life. So there is a specific clairvoyance there. In terms of recalling past lives, there may be practices that I have heard of in Theravada system that people train in are capable of seeing several lives. At least something appears to be very different from their present life, and that must be past life. It will be very difficult to even confirm that there is past life, unless you kind of, these days it may be possible to look up medical records and then see who lived where and then check. But nonetheless, they do seem to, through those practices, they generate that. But then there are other practices like constructing, contributing to building monastery, making tsatsas, training in Sangju, the king of prayer, saying it or understanding it, like that. And then there are 2 specific sutras mentioned there. The reading of it, the studying of it, could contribute to possible recollection of next life. Interesting, yes.
Yeah. Just following along on that, how does a person actually perceive past life once they have super knowledges? How is it that, I think that was more the question, how does a person perceive past lives?
I see. I guess, definitely it would take an intention of doing that, and then maybe contemplating. That's what it would begin to unfold in your mind. Actually, like closing your eyes, going deep with an intention, with that capacity, voila, there is live TV going on. Yeah, thinking of that, speaking of that, very often you may have heard His Holiness the Dalai Lama sharing this story when one of the masters by the name of Changyal Rinpoche, was it some? I think Changyal Rinpoche was the one who was known to have this pre-knowledge or super knowledge, and somebody, I think if I'm telling the story right, he was asked, "You are known to have this. What happens? How does this happen?" And he says that as soon as I set an intention of looking into what is there, it begins with an appearance of a bell. And then around that bell, things kind of wrap around. That's the one that you're looking for. So the person actually asked, could you see what is in my hand or what is in my pocket? And then he would go into contemplation and said, there's a mala. I said, how do you see it? How does it happen? What does it look like? Oh, I just intend to see into where I'm supposed to. And then once I do that, first and foremost, a bell appears. And along that, that's not the thing that you should be looking. But something would then seem to kind of swirl around it. And that's what it is.